I grew up with Mr. Bean, and he had a type of humor that you're not going to find on the internet anymore. In fact, you're not going to find on television anymore. His humor was overwhelmingly non political. It was about him trying to cheat at an exam, him trying to park a car, him trying to order some food at a restaurant. It was a character that would encounter things that we encounter in our daily lives, and he would have just some crazy antics with it. Would be very goofy, and it would put a smile on your face. And this type of humor would bring people together, and it transcended the age gap. Just as I was laughing when I was 6 years old, my grandfather, which was 65, would laugh as well. Nowadays, what passes for humor is highly divisive. You have Kathy Griffin showing a prop that symbolizes the beheaded head of the United States president. And apparently, that's what should be funny. And yes, she is posting that again on Twitter. And yes, people are hiring her again. So it's weird. I mean, if I was 6 years old, I would be terrified by that. I don't think I would have found it funny. And people who are right wing don't find it funny either. And again, like, this is how humor is right now. It's supposed to divide rather than unite. People like Mr. Bean are very rare. And when they do speak out, when they're asked about their political opinions, they infuriate the people on Twitter. And it's very interesting about Twitter. You can say something that 99% of the population would agree, but when you go on Twitter, they will consider that you're a Nazi. And the problem with this is that you have this online space which radicalizes people like never before. I mean, you get journalists on Twitter, you get CEOs on Twitter, you get influential people on Twitter, and the platform bans all of the people that are now even in the center. So you only have like the far left ideas that get promoted, and it reaches a boiling point where all of these people that are radicalized by leftist ideas, and then they place them on their platforms, whether that is The Guardian or BBC or whatever. And these places have always been left, but now they are incredibly far to the left. I mean, you had during the DC riots, you had journalists saying, shoot them, just shoot them, even though they were not. It's weird, it's bizarre. You're looking at it, and you're like, man, if a right-winger would have said this during the riots that happened this summer, not only would have been kicked off Twitter, he would be fired. But again, like, the terms of service do not apply equally to everyone. It's almost like there's two groups of citizens on Twitter right now. But anyway, I digress. You know, that's just my personal opinion on how I look at things. I think that Twitter is radicalizing people incredibly far to the left. It's like Tumblr on steroids. At least Tumblr was something for children and for teenagers. But Twitter is for adult CEOs and journalists, even politicians. And you have, you know, people from the Hezbollah. You have people that are from China that are praising what's being done to the Uyghurs, and you get like all of that being allowed on Twitter. But right wingers that say even something, I don't know, like misgendering, they get banned. Just so you can understand the type of platform that Twitter is. It's just bizarre. It's not against violence, it's just against people who do not align with Twitter's corporate interests. So, the main issue with Twitter is that it allows for cancel culture. And I'll tell you why that's a problem, because cancel culture is mob justice. It doesn't allow people to defend themselves, doesn't allow people to have a lawyer, it doesn't allow people to prevent evidence, it doesn't allow people to face their accusers. No, it's just you do something that someone finds offensive, and immediately you can wake up with an army of people that are trying to ruin your life. Which is funny because Twitter is supposed to have rules and terms of service against harassment and bullying, but they don't consider trying to get someone fired and out of a job to be harassment and bullying. So it's kind of ridiculous. Like, someone misgenders you online, you can literally just close the computer and that person is gone. But if someone tries to get you fired from a job, what can you do about that? You can close the computer, but the person is still doing it. And getting someone fired back in the day used to be very difficult because the person truly had to do some outrageous stuff. in order to deserve getting fired. Because for people to actually get out of their house and protest in front of someone's company, man, like that person really needed to do something actually offensive and really piss off members of society for that to transpire. But now all you have to do is an access to the internet, and if someone says an offensive joke, then you can have 100 or 1,000 people mobilizing and calling that company's phone number. And then the company doesn't even judge whether or not that happened or whether or not people are genuinely offended. It's like, well, it's a lot simpler for them to just get rid of the person, especially when the HR lady doesn't even know the guy because she doesn't necessarily work in the same department with him. And it's the current future. It's very similar to how justice in medieval society worked, where you didn't really have justice if you're a peasant. If you had a noble accusing a peasant, then that peasant would be prosecuted. Or if you had like 10 or 20 or 100 peasants accusing one, then that person would get prosecuted. There was no evidence. The person didn't have the opportunity to hire someone to defend themselves, you know. So yeah, a lot of people don't like cancel culture. Like even if I were to agree that it does the right thing, that it keeps society safe, you don't agree with it based on how it's done. Like there's no evidence being presented, and most importantly, the person doesn't get to defend themselves. It's why most people think McCarthyism is wrong. It's like you just accuse someone of being a communist, and all of a sudden that person gets fired and things happen to them. The Twilight Zone had a very interesting episode about McCarthyism. But anyway, right, so Mr. Bean here, he goes on and he's asked, like, this is what's important. He is asked, like, he's not the type of actor that goes on and flaps their mouth, which many actors do, and everyone claps. It's almost like being an actor means that you have the wisdom and intelligence required in order to talk about social politics. Completely false, but, you know, actors act, and they pretend that they do agree with everything that's in the press so that everyone gets to clap. The moment you're an actor or a famous person and you don't agree with certain things, people come after you. And this is what Mr. Bean found out, because he says the problem we have online is that an algorithm decides what we want to see. And this is, by the way, not even correct, because this used to be the case 2 years ago. Like, you would have an algorithm that would actually try to see what you're looking for. Now it's what the company wants you to see. And a lot of people think that this is just about politics. Like, for example, on YouTube, if you search some news event, you're going to find the mainstream media being stuffed down your throat. Why don't you think it's the same about products? Like, why don't you think that if I look for superhero movies, I'm not going to be stuffed what the social media company wants me to see? And why do you think that behind the scenes money don't get to exchange hands? It's like a company like, I don't know, Disney, can go up and say to Google, look, we're going to pay you money, just put our movies on front. So whenever someone looks for superhero movies, our movies get put up on front versus our competition. And this can happen for any product. Like, I would be shocked if it's not the case, because I know that's the case on Reddit. But anyway, right, so Mr. Bean says that it's not okay because an algorithm decides what we want to see, which ends up creating simplistic binary view of society. It becomes a case of either you're with us or against us. In fact, this is something that I have already seen blue check marks on Twitter post. It's like, we already know if you are not an anti-fascist, then you're against us, and we already know who you are. You know, these ominous things, which shows just how radicalized people have been turned into by Twitter. And if you're against us, you deserve to be canceled. It's important that we're exposed to a wide spectrum of opinion. But what we have now is the digital equivalent of a medieval mob roaming the streets looking for someone to burn. So it's scary for anyone who's a victim of that mob, and it fills me with fear about the future. This is completely reasonable, okay? Just like what he said here is what any normal and sane person would look at, and they would say, yeah, no, there's nothing wrong with what he said. I mean, he was asked about cancel culture. He gave a completely reasonable statement. There's nothing fanatical about what he said. There's nothing extremist. There's nothing bombastic. And yet, you see people here, it's like reacting very negatively to this. Remember when Mr. Bean didn't say shit? I miss that. Mr. Bean's whole thing is literally not talking, which is why he is messing with his success. Cast me as the new Mr. Bean. It's my dream job, and he doesn't deserve it anymore. The guy who played Mr. Bean talking about cancel culture is so funny. Like, are the PC police stopping you from making a silly face after you accidentally put your feet into trout like they're a pair of slippers? And they, like this is the problem. This is the issue. You say something that 99% of the population would just think is normal, and yet when you go on Twitter, you're treated like you're this fringe lunatic. As if you said something so outlandish like there's only 2 genders. And people then all of a sudden freak out. It's like, oh my god, you're a crazy person. Oh, the lunatic is running around. Quick, Jack Dorsey, catch him. Catch him. Send your trusted safety team to cancel him. It's very interesting because, yeah, Mr. Bean is the type of person that doesn't speak. Like, his whole shtick is to just make funny faces and get into encounters where his body language does the talking. So from his point of view, like, literally, he can't be canceled. Like, he is immune to cancel culture. Like, remember when I said that the whole racism of 2021 can be fixed if people become mutes? Because they can't offend anymore. There's nothing Mr. Bean can do to offend people that only get offended when you speak. I mean, back in the day, it used to be that in order to be a racist, you had to burn a cross or something. Like, it was a difficult activity that a lot of people had to perform in order to show that they're racist. And luckily, we moved away from that. But now it's all about flapping your mouth, just speaking, blah, 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 blah. And all of a sudden, racismus. So people like Mr. Bean, they have innate immunity. They cannot be racist because he's not talking. So they can't misconstrue what he says. It's the perfect comedy. The perfect comedy where they cannot get offended because he never gets to talk. And I guess, like, this is why it angers these people, but it also, they can't really express why they're being angry about. They can't articulate why they're angry. They can just say, oh, we're so angry and we're so upset. Like, why are you upset? Because he's speaking shit. Well, what is he saying? And they can't continue the proposition. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.